Imagine walking across a freshly snow-covered field.
Okay.
Like every single step you take leaves this deep, obvious boot print. If someone wanted to find you, all they'd really have to do is just follow that physical trail you left behind.
Right. It's super easy to track.
Exactly. And we kind of live in a world that feels exactly like that snow-covered field, but, digitally. We walk around assuming we are just constantly tracked.
Because we are, usually. I mean, our phones ping local cell towers with every step we take.
Yeah.
Our credit cards log the exact timestamps of, well, all our purchases.
Right.
And our GPS coordinates are practically broadcasted every single time we connect to a public Wi-Fi network.
It's everywhere. Which is why I want you, the listener, to cast your mind back to the year 2016.
A time when we already felt constantly connected and tracked by our smartphones.
We really did.
Yeah.
Yet somehow, on April 12th of that year, a 16-year-old girl managed to just walk out of a high school and vanish completely.
Like evaporated, without a single conclusive trace.
It's wild.
It really is, leaving behind one of the most baffling and complex mysteries in Canadian history.
So today we are doing a deep dive into the disappearance of Mekayla Bali from the quiet prairie town of Yorkton, Saskatchewan. So, okay, let's unpack this, because to understand how she vanished, we really have to look at the physical trail she left on her last known morning.
Right. And when you look at the CCTV footage and the eyewitness accounts from the morning of April 12, what you get is a baseline of incredibly erratic behavior.
Utterly erratic.
To set the scene, the day before, on April 11, Mekayla is at lunch with two of her friends, Shelby and Oksana, and she's casually talking about going on a vacation to Regina or Moose Jaw.
But her friends totally brush it off, right?
Yeah, they assume it's just standard teenage venting, just dreaming about getting out of small town for the weekend.
But then, the very next morning at 6:41 a.m., Mekayla texts Oksana asking for a ride to the bank. And she claims she has like $5,000 in her account.
Which is a very specific, large amount for a 16-year-old.
Exactly. But Oksana says no, mostly because the bank doesn't even open until 8.009008 anyway.
Right.
So Mekayla ends up being dropped off at Sacred Heart High School by her grandmother around 8:10 a.m.
And she does normal school things at first. She logs onto the school Wi-Fi, puts a binder in her locker.
But then by 8:26 a.m., she slips out the back door.
And her physical movements immediately become perplexing. She walks to a local TD bank, waits outside for the doors to open, and when she finally gets to a teller, she doesn't withdraw $5,000.
No.
She only withdraws $55.
$55. And immediately after that, she walks over to Terry's Pawn and Bargain Shop. She approaches the counter and tries to sell a silver ring to the owner.
Right.
But the owner turns her down because the silver value is simply too low.
And she doesn't argue. Right.
No, she doesn't argue. She doesn't seem panicked. She just quietly leaves. But, I have to push back on the dominant theory you see on some of these forums, that this was a carefully planned runaway attempt.
Oh, absolutely.
Because if you're planning a permanent escape, it's like packing for a trip to Europe, but only bringing pocket change. You text your friend claiming you have $5,000, but an hour later you're scrounging for small bills at a pawn shop with a cheap ring.
Yeah, doesn't add up.
It feels more like a sudden panicked pivot than a master plan.
You're hitting on a really crucial psychological shift there. I mean, what we're seeing in these first few hours is a clear pattern of failed expectations.
Failed expectations.
Yeah. Mekayla's physical actions strongly suggest she was relying on a promise of resources that suddenly, unexpectedly fell through.
Ah, I see.
She believed she would have access to significant money. That $5,000 she texted about wasn't just pulled out of thin air, it was likely promised to her by someone.
And when that money didn't materialize at the bank, she was forced to improvise on the fly.
Exactly. You don't try to pawn a low-value silver ring if you have a solid exit strategy. You do it when you are desperate and your original plan has just evaporated.
Which brings us to the biggest question. If her physical actions were driven by a sudden change in plans, who was changing those plans? Like, who is she talking to?
Right.
And that takes us from her physical trail to her digital one. Here's where it gets really interesting, because after the pawn shop at 9:15 a.m., CCTV catches her walking into a combined Tim Hortons and Wendy's.
And she sits in a booth, facing away from the doors.
Yeah, and the footage shows her looking incredibly nervous. She keeps glancing over her shoulder. But more importantly, she takes her phone completely apart.
She removes the back, pulls pieces out, and then puts it all back together.
And not only that, the security cameras capture her holding the phone to her ear, clearly making multiple phone calls. She even leaves the restaurant, walks around outside, comes back in, sits at a different booth, and makes more calls.
But when investigators eventually pull her phone records from her carrier, TELUS, they find absolutely zero record of these calls. Nothing.
Okay, wait, let me stop you there. Because I always assumed that if you had a cell phone in your hand and you were visibly talking to someone, your cellular carrier knows who you're calling.
That's what most people think, yeah.
So if she's making phone calls on camera, how does TELUS have literally zero record of it? Doesn't the phone inherently have to talk to the network to make a call?
Well, that is the common assumption, but here is where we have to distinguish between cellular voice networks and data networks.
Okay.
The Reddit communities have analyzed this footage endlessly, and the prevailing theory is that she was using an encrypted VoIP app. That stands for Voice over Internet Protocol.
So apps like FaceTime Audio, WhatsApp, or Kik.
Exactly. Instead of sending a traditional voice signal to a cell tower, which TELUS would obviously log, VoIP converts your voice into digital data packets and sends them over the internet.
Oh, and because she was sitting in at Tim Hortons, she was likely using their public Wi-Fi.
Right. TELUS wouldn't see a phone call. If they saw anything at all, they'd just see a tiny blip of data usage or, nothing at all if she was purely on Wi-Fi without a SIM.
But what about her taking the phone apart? Like, a lot of people claim she was swapping out SIM cards to avoid tracking. But if she takes out her SIM card, doesn't the phone itself, like the actual hardware, still ping the local cell tower?
Yes, the hardware does.
How does popping out a piece of plastic hide you from the phone company?
You're talking about the IMEI number. It's the International Mobile Equipment Identity. It's basically a unique hardware footprint.
Right.
Even without a SIM card, a phone searching for an emergency signal will ping nearby towers, and the carrier can see that IMEI. However, if you remove the SIM card, you sever the tie to your specific phone number and subscriber identity.
I see.
So if you then strictly use public Wi-Fi to run a VoIP app, you are essentially creating a ghost device.
Wow.
The local cell tower might log that a piece of hardware exists nearby, but it has no idea who is holding it or what data is passing through the Wi-Fi router.
But she's 16. I mean, teenagers are tech literate, sure, but going through the spy-level effort of dismantling a phone, isolating your hardware, and running encrypted VoIP traffic over public Wi-Fi.
It's extremely advanced.
Doesn't that suggest an adult was actively instructing her on how to become a digital ghost?
Yeah, the synthesis of the Reddit theories and the police timeline strongly points directly toward online grooming and coaching.
It has to be.
We know from her friends that Mekayla was using messaging apps like Kik, as well as Snapchat and Instagram. And Kik is notoriously dangerous in the child exploitation world.
Because it's so anonymous, right?
Exactly. Unlike standard messaging apps, Kik doesn't require a phone number to register. It only uses an email and a username, allowing total strangers to communicate with complete anonymity.
So someone was likely telling her exactly what apps to download.
Yes, and how to swap her SIM to avoid her mother tracking her location via the carrier, and how to hide her communications.
And because she used those specific apps, the investigation hit a massive brick wall. The sources note that Canadian police had to wait 10 agonizing months just to get data from US-based tech companies.
10 months.
I struggle to understand this. A teenager is missing. Why on earth does it take almost a year for a police department to get a chat log?
It comes down to the bureaucratic nightmare of international data privacy laws. Specifically a mechanism called an MLT, a Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty.
Okay, how does that work?
Well, when a Canadian police officer needs data from a company like Kik or Instagram, which are based in the United States, they can't just send a search warrant.
Right, different jurisdictions.
U.S. companies are bound by the Stored Communications Act, which strictly prohibits them from handing over user data to foreign governments without a U.S. court order.
So the Canadian cops have to ask American cops to get it for them.
Essentially, yes, but it is incredibly slow. The Canadian investigator has to draft a request, send it to the Canadian federal government, who reviews it and translates it to U.S. legal standards. Then they send it to the U.S. Department of Justice. The U.S. DOJ then has to assign a local federal prosecutor who goes to a U.S. federal judge to convince them that a crime occurred under U.S. law, just to finally subpoena the tech company.
That is insane. So by the time that 10-month process finished and Canadian police finally got access to her social media data, the digital trail was completely frozen over.
Completely cold.
That is maddening.
Yeah.
So her digital secrecy, or rather the secrecy she was coached into, was incredibly successful. But as she successfully masked who she was talking to, her physical reality on the ground in Yorkton was growing more and more desperate.
Because she didn't have the money.
Exactly. The $55 she pulled from the bank wasn't going to cut it. Her plan is falling apart, and this forces her to start asking real people for help. At 10:12 a.m., while she's still at that Tim Hortons, she texts her friend Shelby, "Hey, I need help."
But Shelby doesn't have her phone at school, so she doesn't reply.
Right. And 20 minutes later, Mekayla texts again, "Never mind, I figured it out."
We actually know what she figured it out meant, too.
Oh, we do?
Yeah, because at 10:43 a.m., the CCTV captures her getting up from her booth and approaching an older woman sitting nearby. The RCMP later tracked down and interviewed this woman. Mekayla had asked her for help booking a hotel room.
Wow. And what did the woman say?
The woman declined, not wanting to get involved in whatever this teenager was doing.
Which again points back to that broken promise.
Yeah.
If she was promised a hotel room by whoever she was meeting, but they couldn't book it because they didn't want their adult name on a local registry, they might have told Mekayla to just book it herself.
But she's 16. She can't legally book a room.
Exactly.
And this highlights a very specific psychological mechanism of grooming. Predators often manufacture a crisis to test compliance and isolate the victim.
How so?
By promising a hotel room and then suddenly pulling that resource away, the groomer creates a localized panic. The teenager can't turn to her parents or friends because she's already skipping school and breaking the rules.
That makes sense.
She is now entirely dependent on the predator for a solution. It's a calculated tactic to strip away a victim's safety net.
Man. So after the hotel plan fails, Mekayla's movements take another bizarre turn. Around noon, she actually walks all the way back to her high school.
Right into the school.
Yeah, she's only there for a few minutes, but she bumps into two friends and explicitly tells them she is taking a bus for a vacation to Regina. And then she turns around and leaves the school again. So what does this all mean?
It's so confusing on the surface.
It really is. You're skipping school, you've swapped your SIM card to avoid tracking, you're trying to disappear, and you go back to school right at lunch just to announce to people that you're leaving.
Yeah.
It's like pulling off a bank robbery and going back to the teller to validate your parking ticket. The logic completely falls apart for me.
Well, it falls apart unless you understand the specific mechanics of high school attendance policies.
Okay, what do you mean?
This is where a very perceptive Reddit user brought forward a fascinating theory regarding the school roll call trick.
I haven't heard of that.
In many automated high school attendance systems, if you are absent for the first period of the day, the system flags it, and an automated call goes out to your parents that evening.
Right.
However, if a student shows up later in the day and gets marked present for even a single period, the software often overrides the full-day absence.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it might change the status to tardy or partial absence, which in some districts suppresses the automated phone call home entirely, tricking the administration into thinking the student just had a morning dentist appointment.
Wow. That is chillingly smart. But again, it feels way too calculated for someone who is panicking about a hotel room. It feels like an explicit instruction given to her to maximize the window of time before her mother started looking for her.
It buys them hours.
Exactly. Because after she leaves the school for the second time, she walks to the STC bus depot. She goes into the Trail Stop restaurant attached to the depot, orders a poutine, and sits alone.
And she asks an employee what time the bus to Regina leaves, and she's told it doesn't leave until 5:00 p.m.
And crucially, despite waiting there, she does not buy a ticket.
She just waits.
Right. The depot is the very last confirmed sighting of Mekayla Bali. The cameras catch her there around 1:45 p.m. She walks out of the frame, and that is it.
The trail goes entirely dark.
By 7 a.m. the next morning, her phone is completely powered off and never pings a network again.
And that abrupt ending is what has fueled a decade of theories, cold clues, and absolute heartbreak for her family. Over the last 10 years, the investigation hasn't just sat on a shelf.
Definitely not.
The community raised a $100,000 reward. The RCMP have received and investigated over 1,000 individual tips.
Yeah, I noticed in the sources that a lot of those tips led to massive investigative dead ends, but they really show how much work goes into clearing suspects in a digital age.
Oh, the amount of data is staggering.
There was an online contact in North Carolina named Christopher. The police had to subpoena his IP logs and geolocate his devices just to prove he was never in Canada during the disappearance.
Then they tracked down a local guy named Josh that she used to text, but his location data cleared him too.
They even DNA tested a man who came forward claiming to be her biological father, but police stated definitively he had absolutely no involvement.
Which leaves us with the void after 1:45 p.m. How does a person vanish from a public transit hub in broad daylight?
It's the big question.
The dominant theory across the investigative subreddits is that the bus depot wasn't her destination. It was a rendezvous point.
Okay.
Did an online predator promise her $5,000, instruct her to skip school, tell her to book a hotel room, and then, when she couldn't secure the room or buy a bus ticket, simply tell her to walk to a camera blind spot near the depot where they picked her up in a vehicle?
The evidence for that is haunting, especially when you look at the physical items she left behind. The Reddit communities pointed out that while she was carrying a heavy backpack that day instead of her usual purse, she left her daily acne medication, her Accutane, behind at home.
That's a huge detail.
I keep thinking about the profile of a runaway. A permanent runaway needs resources. They take their money, they take their daily medication. Mekayla had a heavy backpack, but she left her medication behind and had virtually no money. Doesn't this sound exactly like the profile of someone who thought they were just leaving for the weekend, not for the rest of their life?
It's a vital distinction. You have to connect that forgotten medication to the discovery of an alternate Instagram account she maintained.
The one with deleted photos.
Yes. All the photos had been deleted, and the bio simply read, "Goodbye." When you synthesize that goodbye profile with her lack of funds, her history of self-harm mentioned in the Interpol notices, and the intense loneliness she expressed on various online platforms, you see the exact profile groomers look for.
A highly vulnerable teenager desperate for connection.
Exactly. Her desire for a temporary escape was weaponized. A predator promises a new life, a fun weekend, a way out of her current pain. She packs a bag for a couple of days, leaves the medication she thinks she won't need long-term, and walks right into a trap from which she couldn't return.
It makes you rethink everything about our so-called connected world. We started this deep dive talking about the illusion of digital tracking. We walk around every single day feeling like we are constantly surveilled.
We assume the tech will save us.
Right. We assume that if something terrible happened, the cell towers, the IP logs, and the CCTV cameras would draw a map right to us. Yet, Mekayla's case proves that with just a few encrypted apps running on public Wi-Fi, an understanding of how to bypass an IMEI ping, and a carefully chosen blind spot in a town's camera coverage, a person can vanish off the face of the earth entirely.
The digital snow-covered field is an illusion.
It is. Because the tools built to protect our privacy can just as easily be used to erase us. But, the most unsettling part of this entire case is that the digital trail might not have been completely dead even after she vanished.
No, it wasn't. And this is a detail I want to leave you to mull over. It's a chilling footnote buried in the Reddit threads and verified in the news reports.
Yeah, this part gives me goosebumps.
On the day Mekayla disappeared, her best friend sent her a message on Snapchat. For months, it sat there on the server, unread.
Just waiting.
But 3 months later, long after Mekayla's phone was confirmed to be powered down and disconnected from the cellular networks, that specific Snapchat message was opened.
It is a terrifying anomaly. If Mekayla's phone was dead by 7-8 a.m. the morning after she vanished, who turned the device back on 90 days later, connected to a network somewhere in the world just to read a message from her best friend, and why did they never reply?